Cameroon applied to visit Algeria with a message of peace and talks with President Biya. Israeli ambassador gives updates as rare peace talks with Lebanon takes place in Washington, D.C. And U.S. Justice Department seeks to throw out Capitol riots, convictions of 12 people found guilty of seditious conspiracy. This is the World News on AIT. I am Olamide Ario. Welcome. Pope Leo XIV arrives at Central African nation of Cameroon with a message of peace for its separatist region and for talks with President Paul Biya, the 93-year-old leader whose grip on power was extended for an 8th term in a widely disputed election last year. Pope Leo bid goodbye to Algeria on Wednesday after a 2-day visit with a formal farewell ceremony with Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune at Houari Boumediene International Airport in the capital, Algiers. The Vatican says fighting corruption in the mineral-rich country and insisting on the correct uses of political authorities are expected to be theme of Leo's visit, which starts Wednesday with his arrival in Yaoundé, the capital.
Pope Leo will speak with President Paul Biya, the 93-year-old leader whose grip on power was extended for an 8th term in a wildly disputed election last year. The Vatican said fighting corruption in the mineral-rich country and insisting on the country's uses of political authority are expected to be themes of Leo's visit. The Vatican has made clear that Catholic social teaching disapproves of the types of authoritarian leaders that Leo is encountering on his visit. The first to the continent by history's first American Pope. Biya is the world's oldest leader and has led the Central African nation since 1982. Pope Leo is meeting with Biya at the presidential palace in the capital, Yaoundé. He is also to address Cameroon government authorities, civil service representatives and diplomats before visiting an orphanage run by a Catholic religious order of nuns. The Vatican said on Wednesday that Cameroon authorities made a last-minute change to the program. Cameroon's opposition has contested the result of the October 12 election that secured the victory for Biya. His election rival, Issa Cremona Bakary, claims to have won and has called on the Cameroonians to reject the official result. Just this week, Pope Leo issued an unrelated message on the correct role of political leaders and the need for authentic democracy to legitimize their authority and act as a guardrail against the abuse of power. In a message to a Vatican Academy for Social Science, Pope Leo wrote that democracy remains healthy only when it is driven by morality and a vision of humanity that respects dignity of everyone.
Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Yakir Leiter says the first negotiation talks between Israel and Lebanon were positive, saying the two countries are on the same side of the equation. Leiter told reporters in Washington, D.C. that Israel and Lebanon are both united in liberating Lebanon from an occupation power dominated by Iran called Hezbollah.
Lebanon and Israel were holding their first direct talks in decades as fights between Israel and Hezbollah militants rocked southern Lebanon. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio joined the Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors for Tuesday's discussions in Washington. A high-ranking member of the group's political council told reporters that Hezbollah says it will not abide by any agreement. Later, who was the only diplomat to come out and speak after the talks, described the meeting among the U.S., Israel, and Lebanon in an extremely positive tone, despite Rubio's earlier describing the gathering as part of a longer process. The ambassador highlighted several areas of consensus while making it clear that Israel needs to see Lebanon completely separate itself from Tehran and its proxy Hezbollah.
We made it very clear that the security of our civilians is not up for negotiation. That is understood by the government of Joseph Aoun. And I must say, this was a victory for sanity, for responsibility, and for peace.
At least 2,089 people have been killed in Israeli strikes in Lebanon. The health ministry said among them 252 women, 166 children, and 88 medical workers, while 6,762 others were wounded. More than 1 million people are displaced. Meanwhile, the U.S. military claimed Tuesday that it has successfully begun to enforce a blockade of Iranian ports as the standoff between the U.S. and Iran deepens. Tehran threatened to strike targets across the region a day after Trump warned on social media that any Iranian warships nearing the blockade would be destroyed in a quick and brutal strike.
We talked about a number of things, and most importantly, the vision, the long-term vision, where there'll be a clearly delineated border between our countries. What gives me hope is the fact that the Lebanese government made it very clear that they will no longer be occupied by Hezbollah. And Iran has been weakened. Hezbollah is dramatically weakened. This is an opportunity. This is the first time our two countries are sitting together in over 3 decades.
With Pakistan racing to bring the sides together for more talks, U.S. President Donald Trump said Tuesday that a second round could be happening over the next 2 days. The first round ended without an agreement on Iran's nuclear ambitions, which the White House says is a sticking point. Neither side has indicated that will happen after the ceasefire expires on April 22nd.
Hundreds of factory workers protested Tuesday in Haiti capital to demand a higher minimum wage as the conflict in Iran deepens, driving up oil prices. It was the second day that workers at the state-owned Metropolitan Industrial Park, informally known as SONAPI, gathered in power plants and shouted, "When we are hungry, we don't mess around." Employees noted that they haven't had a raise since 2023 and that they can no longer afford basic goods, given that Haiti's government increased diesel prices by 37% and gasoline prices by 29% earlier this month. Factory workers earn 685 GERT, that's about $5.23 a day, while a gallon of gasoline costs 850 GERT, that's $6.49. Joining Tuesday's protest were Willie Badio, who worried about rising transportation prices, among other things. The conflict in Iran has caused oil prices in Haiti to surge, disrupting critical supply chains, doubling transportation costs and forcing millions of undernourished people to cut back on already scarce meals. Haiti, the most impoverished country in the Western Hemisphere, has been hit hardest by rising oil prices that experts warn will deepen a spiraling humanitarian crisis. And more than 200 Iranian sailors left stranded in Sri Lanka after a U.S. torpedo attacker returning home after being stuck in the country for more than a month. On Wednesday, Sri Lanka's Deputy Defense Minister Aruna Jayasekara confirmed 32 sailors rescued from the Iris Dena and 206 from the Iris Bushehr had left the country.
The Iranian warship Iris Dena sank on 4th March about 40 kilometers from Sri Lanka's southern coastline after it was hit by a torpedo from a U.S. submarine, killing 104 sailors. On March 5, Sri Lanka took control of the Iranian naval vessel Iris Bushehr after it had requested to dock at one of the country's posts after one of its engines malfunctioned. Speaking to newsmen, Jayasekara confirmed the crew of both ships were flown out on Tuesday night. The stranded sailors were granted 30 days entry visa by the Sri Lankan government and were housed in Navy and Air Force camps. The Iris Dena had been returning from a military exercise hosted by India when it was attacked. Video released by the U.S. Department of Defense after the incident showed a ship being struck, causing the stern to rise up before exploding. The bodies of 48 Iranian sailors killed in the attack were recovered and later repatriated in a chartered plane arranged by Iran. Its sinking in international waters came just a few days into the current U.S.-Israeli war with Iran and marked a dramatic widening of the conflict, Iran has since launched retaliatory strikes across the Middle East, targeting Gulf countries allied with the U.S.
Mexico faces a prolonged crisis of disappearances that has pushed families to become investigators searching for traces of loved ones in clandestine burial sites across the country. In Jalisco State, one of the areas most affected, relatives of the missing routinely organize search efforts, traveling to remote areas and urban outskirts based on anonymous tips.
More than 130,000 people have been reported missing since 2006, according to official records, in a pattern of violence largely tied to organized crime, even as the country is not formally at war. Armed with basic tools such as shovels and metal rods, they probe the ground for signs of buried remains, often working for hours under harsh conditions. Searchers carefully uncover bones, shoes, and other personal items, treating each discovery with a mix of forensic attention and emotional care. For many, the searchers are driven by years of uncertainty as families balance hope that their relatives may still be alive with the possibility of finding remains that could finally provide answers. The discovery of a body, while devastating, can also represent a form of closure, allowing families to reclaim and bury their loved ones with dignity after years of waiting. The scale of crisis is underscored by the continued discovery of clandestine graves and the accumulation of tens of thousands of unidentified human remains in morgues and cemeteries nationwide. Although authorities have established search commissions and legal frameworks to address disappearances, investigations frequently stall and accountability remains limited. A United Nations committee has warned that Mexico lacks the capacity to adequately address the crisis and has called for international assistance, citing persistent impunity and institutional shortcomings. President Claudia Sheinbaum has rejected those findings, defending her administration and denying accusations that state actors are implicated in disappearances. Families of the missing continue to press for stronger enforcement of existing laws, better coordination among authorities, and the acceptance of international support as the number of disappearances continue to grow. But the lack of answers doesn't hinder their searches.
From Mexico to United States, where the Department of Justice has asked a federal appeal court to throw out the convictions of 12 people who were found guilty of seditious conspiracy related to the 6 January 2021 riots. That means they could be released from prison, but their convictions remained on the record.
Although President Donald Trump issued more than 1,000 pardons for those convicted for their role in the Capitol riots, he opted to commute the sentences of a dozen members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. said in a filing on Tuesday that the United States has determined in its prosecutorial discretion that dismissal of this criminal case is in the interest of justice. The court approving the request to wipe out the convictions would mark a symbolic victory for Trump. He pledged in his presidential campaign to free those charged or convicted for participating in the riots, where protesters sought to stop Congress from certifying that he lost the 2020 election to former President Joe Biden. On his first day back in office, Trump issued pardons or commutations for more than 1,500 people. Oath Keepers founder Stewart Rhodes and several members of his group were among those whose sentence was commuted. Rhodes, a former U.S. Army paratrooper and a Yale-educated lawyer, caught a contingent of his militia members to Washington. They stashed weapons in a hotel across from the Potomac River in Virginia while participating in the melee. Rhodes did not enter the Capitol but directed his members from outside and was sentenced in 2023 to 18 years in prison after being found guilty of seditious conspiracy or attempting to overthrow the government. He is among those seeking to expunge his record in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, which has set a 17 April deadline to file the requests. If the court throws out the convictions, the Trump administration's Justice Department will be spared from having to argue for keeping them in that process. While former Proud Boys leader Henry Tarrio was also convicted for seditious conspiracy over the riots. He was pardoned. Prior to his pardon, Tayo was sentenced to 22 years in prison.
An Australian teenager, William Hamish, has pleaded guilty to creating deepfake pornography in a landmark case. Authorities say it is a bit shocking to note that pornographic videos make up to 98% of the deepfake material currently online, and 99% of that imagery is of women and girls.
The 19-year-old artist is the first person to be charged under a new national law which criminalizes the manipulation of sexual images and carries a maximum penalty of 7 years in prison. Experts say deepfake pornography, often created through artificial intelligence technology and overwhelmingly targeting women and girls, is the new frontier of gendered image-based abuse and school bullying. Yayatis did not comment as he left court after admitting 4 offenses on Wednesday. He will return for a hearing in April. Yayatis was previously facing 20 Commonwealth charges, but the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions withdrew some of them after he pleaded guilty to creating or altering sexual material without consent and distributing it, as well as using the carriage service in a harassing or offensive way. The court heard Yayatis had distributed images of his alleged victim across multiple X accounts without her consent. A spokesman for Commonwealth prosecutors previously confirmed it was the first prosecution of its kind, though some states also have their own laws relating to deepfake material. Australia's internet regulator, the E-Safety Commission, has been warning of the rising threat of AI-manipulated material and has been fighting to ban apps that nudify subjects in Australia. Experts warn that there is compelling and concerning data that explicit deepfakes have increased on the internet as much as 550% year-on-year since 2019.
And North Koreans are marking the anniversary of the birth of their founding leader, Kim Il-sung. The ritual nowadays is slightly different from the past. The giant statues of Kim Il-sung and his son, Kim Jong-il, are still overlooking the middle of the capital, Pyongyang. And people still come to show their respect by laying flowers at their feet and bowing. But some of the ceremonies surrounding April 15 have slightly changed. Experts who watch North Korea from outside the country have noticed changes in recent years. The anniversary used to be uniformly called Sun's Day, but that phrase is no longer prominent. And there used to be a giant flower show with thousands of blooms, all named Kim Il-sung after the former leader. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, that show has not been held for years. Now it's back, but in a very different version. There are all kinds of flowers, not just the Kim Il-sung and the Railroad Jr. Kim Jong-il, named after the North's second leader, Kim Jong-il. And the traditional big portrait of Kim Il-sung hanging over the flower show is not there. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has appointed Rolf Meyer, who served in the last government of the apartheid era, as his new ambassador to the United States. The country has not had a top envoy in the U.S. since Ebrahim Rasool was expelled last year after he accused President Donald Trump of trying to project white victimhood as a dog whistle. This worsened already strained relations between the nations, which took a downward spiral after Trump's return to office last year. Ramaphosa's spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, confirmed Meyer's appointment, saying it would be immediate. The 78-year-old Meyer played a key role as one of the chief mediators alongside Ramaphosa during the talks to end the racist system of white minority rule known as apartheid in South Africa in the 1990s. He was the chief representative of the National Party, which introduced apartheid, while Ramaphosa represented the African National Congress, ANC, led by Nelson Mandela. During that period, the two enjoyed a fishing trip together and went on to form a lifelong friendship. Meyer was a part of a group of 32 prominent South Africans the president chose last year to guide the national dialogue, a process aimed at addressing the country's various challenges. He was Constitutional Affairs Minister in the last apartheid government and later joined the government of National Unity formed in 1994 when Mandela became the president of South Africa. And you're still watching the World News on AIT. We'll go on a short break. We'll be back with more stories.
Stories now break online. Don't miss anything from our real-time updates and exclusive content. Follow and participate in discussions on live TV studio programs to shape the narratives. Subscribe, engage, and share from AIT.live at AIT_online on X, AIT Online on Facebook, official AIT Live on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads on YouTube. Stay connected with AIT. On air, online, on live.
Many thanks for staying with us on AIT. And moving on now, President Bola Tinubu has displayed intentional interest in the empowerment, development, and growth of women and girls, not only in politics, but in all sectors of the economy. Minister of Women Affairs and Social Development, Imam Suleiman Ibrahim, revealed these at the Dynamism of Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics conference put together by the Petroleum Natural Gas Senior Staff Association Women Wing.
Government and your community had a mutual agreement. We're not talking about the details and the contents of the agreement we had. But the purpose was to reduce insecurity.
But I can tell you that there was never a time a single camera was installed in these locations. And if you want to prove me wrong, I can challenge you to prove me wrong by submitting a pictorial view of the camera installed in this location with a GPS coordinate.
For the president of Pengesan, Festus Wosifu, and the Women Commission National Chairperson Adam Baneso, the space for educated women to apply their trade is so limited. More opportunities are needed to engage qualified girls and women, especially those in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
The government was supposed to take over from us after they issued the PACs. However, the government was not ready to do that. So ZTE operated this equipment for 6 months because we wanted to make sure that everybody could come and say, oh, this thing is working. We wanted to make sure that that was the case. So it was operated for 6 months. We were supposed to do the maintenance on operations, but the issue was probably they were not funded.
This conference is that both the private and public sector must make frantic effort to empower the women and make her much more productive to herself and the society. And up next on the World News is Sport Track.
The stories now break online. Don't miss anything from our real-time updates and exclusive content.
Super Eagles forward Ademola Lookman delivered another decisive moment for Atletico Madrid, scoring in their UEFA Champions League quarter-final to reach the Final Four with a 3-2 aggregate victory against FC Barcelona. Nigeria Super Eagles forward Ademola Lookman was on the score sheet as Atletico Madrid booked their place in the UEFA Champions League semi-finals for the first time since 2017. Found the net in the 31st minute to revive Atletico's challenge after Barcelona had overturned the host 2-goals first leg advantage earlier in the match. Diego Simeone's side returned to the semi-finals for the first time since 2017 by holding on against the La Liga champions in a compelling and bloody battle. Barcelona ended the game with 10 men as Eric Garcia was sent off for bringing down Soloth as he ran in on goal, hampering their chance of finding a third goal to force extra time. Atletico, who have never won the competition and lost the 2014 and 2016 now in Lisbon. Alexander Hughes said he should be allowed to do what he wants to do. As a heavyweight great defended his decisions to face boxing novice Rico Verhoeven on 23rd May in Egypt. In a news conference which included a prediction, Anthony Joshua would be the next undisputed heavyweight champion and a 2-minute face-off. Usyk made it clear the Verhoeven fight was a decision he made for himself in the twilight of his career. Verhoeven, 37, has boxed professionally only once. In 2014, while 39-year-old Usyk is one of the most decorated fighters in the sport's history. Usyk is an Olympic gold medalist, undisputed cruiserweight champion, and 2-time undisputed heavyweight champion who remains unbeaten in 24 professional bouts. The contest is widely viewed as a major mismatch, with critics particularly questioning why the WBC world title is at stake. And that's it on the world news. I am Olamide Aroyo. Many thanks for staying with us.